She'd been mopping floors for 6 years. No one knew she spoke 5 languages until the moment the millionaire nearly walked out. And Ruth said 2 words that stopped the world. The lobby of the Avalon Hotel sparkled beneath the July sun, its marble floor polished to a near mirror, its chandelier casting diamonds of light across the walls. It was the kind of place where whispers were the loudest noise, where bellhops never broke stride, and where first impressions, especially of race and accent, could be a silent verdict. At 8:42 a.m., the doors parted with a soft hiss, and in stepped a woman in a tailored cream coat and dove-gray heels. Her black hair was neatly swept into a chignon, and her gait carried the kind of stillness born not of submission, but of centuries. Naomi Saito, CEO of Saito Tech International, the architect behind the most seamless AI-integrated infrastructure in East Asia, paused in the center of the lobby. She had traveled 6,400 miles to finalize the acquisition of a mid-sized American logistics firm based in Chicago. She came with intent, and she came alone. The concierge barely glanced up. Behind the reception counter, Pamela Green, guest experience manager in her mid-40s, known for her instincts, watched with narrow eyes. She saw Naomi's suitcase, minimalist, expensive, foreign. She saw the woman's stillness, the way she seemed to measure the space before approaching. And she saw what she wanted to see. "Excuse me?" Naomi said calmly, in clear English. Pamela blinked, then looked over Naomi's shoulder as though expecting a translator. "I'm sorry, we're fully booked," she said crisply. "I have a reservation under Saito," Naomi replied, her voice even, her consonants precise. Pamela didn't move. "And do you have identification?" Naomi pulled out her Japanese passport and slid it across the counter. The concierge hesitated, then gestured to Pamela, who came forward. Pamela held the document between 2 manicured fingers, not touching it more than necessary. "Huh," she muttered. "I can't read this." "It's written in both Japanese and English," Naomi said, folding her hands. "Well, maybe someone else should assist," Pamela offered, clearly irritated now. "Do you speak any English?" Behind the stone counters and velvet ropes, Ruth Coleman was mopping near the elevators. She moved slowly, her cart squeaking. She wore the deep blue jumpsuit of hotel maintenance, her graying hair tied back in a low bun. People didn't look at Ruth, and Ruth didn't often look up. But this time, she did. Her ears, trained long ago in a Kyoto classroom, had caught every syllable. The cadence, the restraint, and the crack forming in Naomi's armor. Naomi did not flinch, but Ruth saw the muscle shift in her jaw. Naomi turned slightly and said in formal Kyoto dialect, "I have a reservation. Excuse me, but what kind of treatment is this?" "I have a reservation. Forgive me, but what kind of treatment is this?" Ruth's breath caught. That voice, that language, that dignity. Pamela frowned. "What was that?" Naomi didn't answer. She simply stood straighter, letting silence return the question. "I'll call security," Pamela threatened. "I wouldn't," said Ruth softly. Pamela turned. "Excuse me?" "I said I wouldn't do that," Ruth repeated, stepping forward. Her mop dripped on the marble. "Her name is Naomi Saito. She has a confirmed reservation, and she's speaking perfect English." A long beat passed. Pamela's face tightened. "I don't believe we've asked for the opinion of the cleaning staff." Ruth gave a half smile. "No, I imagine you don't." For a moment, the 3 women stood in a triangle of tension. Power unspoken, biases laid bare. Naomi finally spoke, addressing Pamela. "Would you kindly direct me to the general manager?" Pamela hesitated. Why? Because your hospitality has spoken louder than your policies, Naomi replied. A subtle shift echoed through the lobby. The bellhop, the assistant manager nearby, even the young woman at the concierge desk, all were watching. No one moved. Pamela opened her mouth, then shut it. Naomi retrieved her passport, turned to Ruth, and inclined her head. Thank you. Ruth bowed slightly in return, and Naomi continued toward the executive elevators, her heels tapping with quiet authority. It wasn't until the doors closed behind her that Ruth exhaled. She returned to her mop, her cart, and her place beside the elevator. But something inside her had stirred, and it would not be silenced again. The next morning, the Avalon Hotel lobby moved like clockwork. Businessmen murmured into phones, briefcases clicked across polished marble, and staff flowed through the space with the practiced grace of a well-oiled machine. But Ruth Coleman didn't move with them. Not outwardly. Her mop still glided smoothly along the marble baseboards, but inwardly, something had shifted. She hadn't slept much the night before. After her night shift ended, she took the 4:20 bus back to her tiny one-bedroom on the south side. She heated a cup of instant noodles, sat at her kitchen table, and stared at the calendar pinned beside her fridge. August 12th. That date always knocked the breath out of her. It marked two things: the anniversary of her mother's stroke, and the day Ruth walked away from a career she had spent her entire adult life building. 12 years ago, she was preparing to step into a tenure-track position at the University of Chicago, her resume still warm from the printer, her portfolio stacked with lesson plans and peer-reviewed articles. Then came the call. Her mother had collapsed alone in the backyard. Ruth boarded the next flight home from Kyoto, never looked back, and never spoke of it again. She folded that future into a drawer. Her mother needed round-the-clock care. No siblings. No help. So Ruth traded her lectures on syntax for grocery lists and pill organizers. When her mother passed 4 years ago, Ruth tried to return to academia. But the academic world had moved on. Her credentials were labeled outdated. Her resume met silence. So she found work as a custodian at Avalon Hotel. It offered a steady paycheck, health benefits, and anonymity. Now, in the janitor's closet on the 3rd floor, Ruth stood surrounded by shelves of bleach, gloves, and folded rags. From a sealed plastic bag hidden behind the cleaning supplies, she pulled out a worn manila folder. Inside, her old resume, printed on expensive ivory paper. The ink had faded, but the words were still legible. She ran a finger across the lines. Master of Arts in Linguistics. Graduated with Honors Guest Lecturer. International Language Symposium. Former Instructor. Comparative Phonology. She stared at the pages for a long time. So much effort. So much hope. And now? A mop and a name tag. But yesterday had shaken something loose. She hadn't spoken her second language in years. But when Naomi Saito stood in that lobby and was treated like an intruder in her own reservation, Ruth had stepped forward, not because she expected it to change anything, but because silence had begun to feel like betrayal. And for the first time in over a decade, someone looked at her, not with pity, not as invisible, but with recognition. Naomi had seen her, truly seen her. That afternoon, while Ruth was cleaning the corridor on the 3rd floor, a man in a navy blazer approached. He carried a clipboard and had the composed look of someone from corporate. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you Ruth Coleman?" She stood upright. "Yes?" He extended his hand. "My name's Andre. I work directly with Ms. Saito. She asked me to speak with you." Ruth blinked. "About what?" Andre smiled. About yesterday. Ms. Saito asked me to pull your personnel file. When I saw your background, I'll admit, I had to double-check. Ruth's expression stayed guarded. Andre continued, You worked in linguistics? Taught at university? Years ago, Ruth said quietly. It's not relevant anymore. I think Ms. Saito would disagree, Andre replied. She said your courage meant more to her than the hotel's treatment. She'd like to meet you tomorrow, 10 a.m. executive floor, just a conversation. He handed her a white card. Ruth stared at the embossed logo and the gold lettering beneath it. Saito Tech International, Office of the President. That night, back in her apartment, Ruth turned on the kettle but forgot to pour the water. Her mind buzzed with memories and warnings and a hope so fragile she was afraid to name it. She pulled out the folder again and placed it on her kitchen table. Then, with a strange kind of reverence, she stood before her closet and unzipped the protective cover on a navy blazer. It still smelled faintly of cedar. She laid it on the bed, pressing the sleeves flat with her palms. In the drawer beneath her nightstand, she found an old paperback she once used for tutoring students, an English language guide for educators working with bilingual students. She flipped through the underlined pages, yellowed with age, but filled with annotations in the margins. On the final page, in her own handwriting, she had once scribbled a quote, Even silence speaks, but not everyone listens. She closed the book slowly. Then she stood in front of the mirror, the same one that hung above her kitchen sink. She no longer saw only a woman with calloused hands and aching knees. She saw the instructor, the caretaker, the voice that had not been lost, only buried. In a voice steadier than she expected, Ruth whispered to her reflection, I remember who I am. And this time, she believed it. Ruth Coleman stood outside the executive elevator of the Avalon Hotel, her palms slightly damp against the folder she carried, the same folder that once collected dust behind mop buckets and bleach bottles. Now, she clutched it like a key to a locked part of herself. A soft ding announced the elevator's arrival. The doors opened to reveal an entirely different world, polished wood paneling, soft lighting, minimalist artwork. It was quieter here, the kind of silence that carried weight, not absence. Andre was waiting by the reception desk on the 20th floor. He smiled when he saw her. Ms. Coleman, he said. Right on time. Ruth adjusted the collar of her navy blazer. I wasn't sure what to wear. Andre smiled gently. You wore dignity. That's enough. He led her down a corridor lined with glass offices, past people in sleek suits with expensive watches and spotless shoes. Ruth didn't try to keep pace. She walked steadily, every step echoing the strange balance between fear and resolve. At the far end, a frosted glass door slid open. Inside stood Naomi Saito. This time, Naomi wore a dark charcoal suit. Her hair was still neatly tied back, but she looked more rested, and perhaps more expectant. She walked around the desk and offered her hand. Thank you for coming, Naomi said. Ruth took it. Thank you for asking. They sat. Andre quietly exited, leaving the two women in a room filled with soft daylight and quiet anticipation. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ruth offered the folder. I thought you might want to see this, she said, her voice low. Naomi opened it gently. She read each line with focus, not skimming, not scanning. Her brows lifted once, then again. You taught comparative linguistics? Naomi asked, almost reverently. I used to, Ruth said. Before life shifted. Naomi nodded. I know something about shifts. She closed the folder. You speak with restraint. And yesterday, when you stood up for me, you didn't have to. But you did. I couldn't stay silent anymore, Ruth said, then paused. And I recognized your accent. It reminded me of the life I buried. Naomi's gaze softened. I've spent most of my career, she said slowly, being underestimated before I spoke, and even more so after I did. But yesterday, your words changed the entire atmosphere of that lobby. Ruth said nothing. Naomi leaned forward, folding her hands on the table. Do you know how rare it is for someone to recognize not just the language of a person, but the intent behind it? Ruth met her gaze. I've lived long enough to know what silence costs. Naomi sat back. You didn't just translate words. You translated dignity. There was a long, quiet pause. Ruth's hands were still folded in her lap. I've reviewed your file, Naomi continued. Your education, your experience. There's a position I'd like to offer you. But before we talk about titles, I want to ask you something more important. Ruth looked up. Do you want your voice back? The question didn't come with pressure. It came like a key placed on the table. Ruth's throat tightened. She thought of long nights beside her mother's bed, of the years spent in silence, of the part of herself she had trained to never expect more. And now someone was offering to unlock that door. I don't know what I'm capable of anymore, Ruth said honestly. Naomi smiled. That's why you begin again. Not because you're sure, but because you're curious. There was a knock. Andre peeked in. Naomi, we have the Tokyo call in 10. Naomi nodded. I'll be there. She stood, then looked back at Ruth. Come by tomorrow at noon. There's someone I want you to meet. The Director of International Strategy. She's retiring this fall. Ruth blinked. Wait, are you? I'm not promising anything yet, Naomi said gently. I'm offering possibility. She extended her hand again. And respect. Ruth shook it. This time her grip was steady. As she stepped back into the hallway, she noticed something she hadn't before, her reflection in the glass walls. She didn't look like a custodian. She looked like someone returning home. The next day, a light rain tapped against the windows of Avalon Hotel's upper floors. It blurred the skyline of Chicago just enough to make the city feel like a memory, sharp around the edges but softened by time. Ruth Coleman stood outside Conference Room B, her umbrella still dripping and her thoughts racing. She had chosen a different blouse today, ivory, with a soft collar, and had finally taken the time to iron her slacks. She wore no jewelry, but her posture was different, straighter, not proud, but awake. At exactly 12 o'clock p.m., Andre opened the door and smiled. They're ready for you, he said. She stepped inside. The room was spacious but simple. A long oval table, a projection screen idle in the background. And at the head of the table, seated with calm precision, was Naomi Saito, CEO of Saito Tech, calm as ever. Beside her sat an older woman with silver hair in a tight bun and clear eyes that missed nothing. Her name tag read, Meredith Walsh, Director of International Strategy. Naomi gestured toward the empty seat. Please, have a seat, Ms. Coleman. Ruth sat, her hands folded in her lap once more. Meredith gave her a nod. I've read your file, she said without preamble. And I saw the footage. Ruth hesitated. Footage? Naomi turned slightly toward her. I hope you don't mind. After what happened in the lobby, I requested internal security footage from the front desk cameras. I wanted to document the moment, not to shame anyone, but to show something the world rarely sees. "And what is that?" Ruth asked softly. Naomi held her gaze. "Dignity speaking up before power." Ruth felt her heart pull tight. Meredith continued. "What you did wasn't just kind, it was strategic. You intervened with words, not confrontation. You de-escalated without surrendering your ground. That's the kind of voice international diplomacy requires." Ruth looked down. "I didn't think of it that way." "You wouldn't," Meredith said, "because people like you are rarely trained to think of themselves as leaders." Naomi interjected, "That's what I want to change." She stood, walked to a small podium in the corner of the room, and picked up a black remote. With a soft click, the projector came to life. Security footage filled the screen. The familiar Avalon Hotel lobby. Ruth cleaning near the elevators. Naomi standing at the front desk. Pamela speaking with her usual clipped impatience. There was no sound. But the body language said everything. Pamela's dismissive wave, Naomi's stillness, Ruth's step forward. And then, Ruth, speaking, not in defiance but with precision, Naomi inclining her head. The screen froze at that moment. "I've shown this to my board of directors," Naomi said, "not as a scandal, but as a study in humility and perception. Too often companies make the mistake of assuming leadership looks like confidence in a three-piece suit. But leadership, real leadership, is knowing when silence becomes complicity." Ruth felt as if someone had touched a part of her soul she'd long forgotten. Not flattered, not elevated, just witnessed. Then Naomi said the words Ruth never expected to hear. "I'm appointing you as the new director of cross-cultural relations at our Chicago office." Ruth blinked. "What?" "You'll have your own office. A full team. Starting salary, $92,000. You'll oversee multicultural training across all North American branches and help us restructure how we recruit talent, especially from overlooked communities." Ruth stared at her, stunned. "I'm not sure I'm qualified for that," she said at last. Meredith smiled for the first time. "No one ever is, until they are." Naomi returned to her seat. "You don't need to decide today, but I want you to know this offer doesn't come from pity. It comes from recognition." A knock on the door interrupted the moment. It was Pamela Green. She stepped in, clearly unaware of what was being discussed. Her voice was brisk. "Sorry, Naomi, I was told to—" She froze. Her eyes landed on Ruth. On the screen. On the paused image. Of herself, mid-gesture, ignoring Naomi. What is this?" Pamela asked, voice stiffening. Naomi stood. "A meeting, Pamela. You're interrupting." Pamela's smile tightened. "I didn't realize the janitorial staff was involved in executive briefings." Naomi didn't flinch. "Ruth Coleman is being considered for a leadership position." The air changed. Pamela turned toward Ruth, something between disbelief and insult flickering across her face. "You're joking." Meredith spoke now, calm but firm. "Ms. Green, if you have concerns, please document them through HR channels. This meeting is not yours." Pamela took a half step back, her expression unreadable. Naomi added, "You may want to prepare for a formal review. The footage from the lobby is now part of the corporate training archive." Pamela's face drained of color. I'll come back later," she said, and backed out. Silence filled the room after the door closed. Ruth's voice, when it returned, was soft. That wasn't what I wanted. I didn't mean to cost anyone their job. Naomi met her eyes. You didn't cost anyone anything. You simply told the truth. What they did with it, that's their responsibility. Ruth sat in silence for a long moment, then nodded. I'll accept the position, she said, but only if I can earn it. No favors, no fast tracks. I want to build it. Naomi smiled. I wouldn't have offered it otherwise. As Ruth left the room, the rain outside had stopped. The clouds were thinning. The city glimmered again. And somewhere inside her chest, the silence that had lived for so long began to break apart, like dawn through mist. The following Monday, the sun returned to Chicago in full force, casting warm gold across the brick buildings and steel bridges of the Loop. Ruth Coleman arrived early, not to mop, but to meet her new team. She stood in front of a glass door etched with her new title, Director of Cross-Cultural Relations, Saito Tech Chicago Office. Even now, the words didn't feel entirely real. A week ago, she was invisible. Now she had an office with a view of the lake and a calendar filled with meetings involving regional directors, diversity councils, and international liaisons. But beneath the disbelief, there was something deeper rising in her chest. Responsibility, and something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Inside, Naomi was waiting, seated at the edge of Ruth's new desk. You beat me here, Naomi said, smiling. I always used to be first on shift, Ruth replied. Old habits. Naomi gestured toward the chair across from her. Sit with me. There's one more conversation we need to have. Ruth nodded and took a seat, her hands folded calmly, but her nerves flickering just beneath the surface. Naomi placed a manila envelope on the desk. Inside is your formal contract. Base salary, $92,000. Full benefits. Your own team. And your own budget to develop community outreach programs related to linguistic equity and cultural representation. Ruth raised an eyebrow. Linguistic equity? Naomi leaned forward, her eyes focused. I want more people like you, not just here, but everywhere. People whose intelligence was buried under bills, people who speak more than one language, but were told their accents made them less credible. People who code switch to survive. Ruth's throat tightened. She had lived every word Naomi spoke. But I don't want this to feel like a rescue, Ruth said softly. I want to know it's earned, that I can deliver something valuable. Naomi didn't blink. You already have. She paused, then added, This isn't about making space. It's about giving back the space that was always yours. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Naomi pulled out a second envelope and slid it across the desk. Ruth looked confused. What's this? A personal letter from our Tokyo office, Naomi said. Addressed to you. When I mentioned your name during a board call last Friday, someone recognized it. Ruth opened the envelope carefully. The letter was typed in English, with a short handwritten note at the bottom. As her eyes moved down the page, her breath caught. Professor Akiyama, she whispered. Naomi nodded. He remembered you. He said you were the only student who ever challenged him on phonetic drift in Japanese dialects. He's now head of Cytotech's language division. He said if you accept the position, he wants you to visit Tokyo next quarter. Ruth was speechless. Her past, so long buried, was no longer just remembered. It was calling her forward. That afternoon, Ruth toured the office with Andre, who had become both guide and quiet admirer. You're the talk of the 20th floor, he joked. Even legal is jealous of your coffee budget. Ruth laughed. Well, if I'm going to start rewriting training for inclusion, I'll need more than caffeine. I'll need courage. You've got plenty of that, he said gently. And by the way, I submitted my resignation this morning. Ruth stopped. What? Why? Andre smiled. To come work for you, if you'll have me. She blinked. You want to join my team? He nodded. You see people. That's rare and corporate. And I'm tired of policies that protect image instead of people. You've got vision. And now, you've got me. Ruth exhaled, overwhelmed and grateful. Then let's build something that matters. Later that evening, Ruth returned home and stood in front of her bathroom mirror. She didn't recognize the woman looking back at her, not because she had changed so much, but because this time she could see all of herself clearly. Not just the janitor, not just the daughter, not just the woman who once studied linguistics in Kyoto, but a leader, a builder, a woman chosen, not out of pity, but out of respect. She opened the fridge and found half a leftover sandwich. She smiled, poured a glass of water, and sat down at the kitchen table. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She wrote. Not a resume, not an apology, but a plan. For community outreach, for scholarships, for programs that found the invisible and helped them step into the light. The night was quiet. But for the first time in years, Ruth Coleman felt like her voice was no longer waiting to be heard. It already was. At 7:15 a.m. on a Thursday morning, Pamela Green stepped into Avalon Hotel's grand lobby with the same purposeful stride she'd used for years. Her heels echoed confidently across the marble, and her clipboard, always clutched tight, was freshly organized. But something was different. The bellhop didn't make eye contact. The front desk staff gave her curt nods instead of their usual small talk. Even the concierge, a younger woman named Melissa, seemed oddly focused on her monitor as Pamela passed by. She tried to shake it off. Just a bad morning. People have moods. But deep down, she knew. The video had circulated. She'd heard whispers the day before. Staff avoiding her. Side glances. One housekeeper even walked the long way around the service corridor to avoid crossing her path. Still, Pamela was a fighter. She had built her reputation on staying composed under pressure. As she rode the elevator to the 20th floor, she rehearsed her defense. She would explain that it had been a misunderstanding, that no one told her Naomi Saito was a CEO, that she had simply been protecting the front desk from confusion, from disruption. A manager's job, after all, was to maintain standards. When the elevator doors opened, the hallway was quiet. Too quiet. In the conference room, Naomi Saito sat at the head of the table, flanked by HR Director Marcia Layton and Legal Affairs Manager Chris Yang. A sleek tablet sat before Naomi, displaying a paused frame from the now infamous footage. Pamela entered, eyes slightly narrowed but head held high. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, voice tight. Naomi didn't stand. "Please have a seat." Pamela sat, crossing one leg over the other. "If this is about the incident in the lobby, I want to clarify a few things. There was a language barrier. No one could verify the guest's identity. I was simply—" Naomi raised her hand slightly. "Pamela," she said calmly, "I'm not here to litigate excuses. I'm here to inform you that we've concluded our internal review." Marcia spoke next. The footage revealed conduct that does not align with Saito Tech's values, especially regarding how guests are treated based on assumptions about language, nationality, and perceived status. Pamela flushed. "With all due respect, this is being blown out of proportion." Naomi tapped the tablet. The footage began to play again. Pamela's voice, though low, was clear. "Do you speak any English?" And Ruth's quiet response, "She does." Then Pamela's scoff, her dismissal, her threat to call security. The video froze. Chris Yang turned a page in his folder. "You were recorded violating several hospitality codes, including racial bias, guest profiling, and employee intimidation." Pamela's jaw clenched. "So what does this mean?" Naomi looked her in the eye. "It means your employment at Avalon Hotel is terminated, effective immediately." A long silence settled over the room. Pamela's voice, when it came, was brittle. "You can't be serious." Naomi didn't blink. "We are." Pamela stood abruptly. "You think this makes you some kind of hero? Replacing me with a janitor?" Naomi remained still. "We're not replacing you. We're correcting a mistake." Pamela scoffed and turned toward the door, but Naomi spoke once more. "Pamela," she paused. "You weren't fired because of one mistake. You were fired because of what that mistake revealed, and how you chose to justify it." Pamela didn't respond. She left the room, her heels no longer echoing power, but panic. In the following weeks, Pamela applied for 5 managerial roles at different hotels across Chicago. Each time, the interview would begin cordially, until someone brought up the footage. It had been posted to Saito Tech's internal ethics channel, and through whispers and shares, leaked into the larger hospitality network. Pamela began using her maiden name. She switched addresses on her resume. She removed references to Avalon altogether, but nothing worked. She took a job managing inventory at a local department store. The staff didn't fear her. They ignored her. Her office had no windows. The only clipboard she carried now tracked towel sets and broken scanners, and her phone stayed silent. Even her brother stopped returning her calls after reading about the incident online. At night, Pamela sat in her rented apartment in Logan Square, too small, too quiet, and scrolled endlessly through job boards. The memory of the lobby scene played over and over in her mind. Only this time, she wasn't angry. She was ashamed. Not because she had lost her job, but because she had never questioned how easy it had become to look through people instead of at them. Back at Avalon, things were different. Naomi hosted a corporate training retreat on the 20th floor, with Ruth leading the breakout session titled Listening Beyond Language. Ruth spoke clearly, her voice calm and sure. She didn't mention Pamela by name. She didn't need to. She told the story of what it means to be unseen, and what it takes to change that, not with grand speeches or titles, but with one sentence, one moment, one quiet refusal to look away. When she finished, the room was still. Then applause, real, lasting, earned. Later that afternoon, Andre found Ruth in her new office. "There's someone on the phone asking to speak to you," he said gently. "Who is it?" He hesitated. "Pamela Green." Ruth looked at the phone for a long moment, then shook her head slowly. "Tell her I'm not available. But tell her I wish her healing." Andre nodded and walked out. Ruth turned back to her desk. There was no victory in humiliation, no joy in someone else's fall. Only this: the responsibility to rise gently, so others might remember how. At exactly 8 a.m., sunlight poured through the tall windows of the 19th floor, painting long beams across Ruth Coleman's new office. From where she sat, she could see all of downtown Chicago. the Willis Tower stretching into the morning sky, the winding path of the Chicago River, and far off, the glimmer of Lake Michigan like a held breath on the horizon. But Ruth wasn't looking out. She was leaning over her desk, red pen in hand, reviewing a proposal titled Multilingual Inclusion, a National Pilot Program. Submitted by Ruth Coleman, Director of Cross-Cultural Relations. The proposal outlined 14 new initiatives across Saito Tech's North American branches, ranging from bilingual hiring protocols to cultural intelligence training, real-time interpretation tools for onboarding, and a university partnership program offering scholarships to students who were multilingual but financially disadvantaged. She had worked through the night, fueled by nothing but green tea and something much more potent: conviction. By mid-morning, her calendar was full. 9:30 a.m. Conference call with the Toronto branch. 10:15 a.m. DEI panel with HR. 11 o'clock a.m. Language access audit for the San Diego office. 12:30 p.m. Working lunch with Naomi. Ruth didn't just supervise diversity, she architected it. She read case studies on unconscious bias in training materials, drafted glossaries for region-specific dialects, even helped revise the Global Employee Handbook's tone to include plain language accessible to ESL readers. What others saw as policy, she translated into human dignity. Her team was small but growing. Andre handled operations. A young translator named Kiara focused on field communication, and an intern from the University of Illinois named Leo helped build survey tools. Every morning they gathered for 15 minutes around her desk. They didn't just talk about deadlines. They talked about purpose. At 12:35 p.m., Naomi arrived with 2 bento boxes and her signature calm. "You forgot to eat again," she said, placing one box gently in front of Ruth. Ruth smiled. "Only because I was rewriting a section on identity-safe workplace language." Naomi sat across from her. "Tell me about the Texas pilot." Ruth lit up. "We're partnering with a community college in El Paso. Most of their students speak both English and Spanish, but none of their part-time jobs offer translation pay. We're changing that. If they can navigate 2 languages fluently, they're already more qualified than half the tech interns out there." Naomi leaned back, smiling with something like pride. "That's the kind of logic we need at the executive level." Then her tone shifted. "I had a meeting this morning with the global board." Ruth's posture straightened. Naomi continued. "They're requesting we expand the Chicago model across all international hubs. They want you to present the strategy next month, in Tokyo." Silence. Ruth stared at her. "They want me to present?" Naomi nodded. "To 35 board members, in 2 languages. You're the architect of the system now. It's time they see the face behind it." Ruth exhaled. "That's bigger than I imagined." Naomi smiled. "Good. So was your potential." That evening, as most of the building's lights flickered off, Ruth remained in her office, watching the city turn amber and gold as dusk settled in. She stood by the window, her fingertips resting lightly on the frame. A year ago, this view might have seemed unreachable. Now, it was part of her daily life. But Ruth never forgot where she came from. Taped to the inside of her desk drawer was a note, just 3 words, scribbled in her own handwriting. "Be worth seeing." She had written it during her darkest year, when her life revolved around caring for her mother and scrubbing hotel tiles at midnight. It wasn't about being famous or being admired. It was about being visible. Not for recognition, but for truth, for change, for those who came after. At 7:55 p.m., Ruth finally gathered her things. She turned off the desk lamp, slung her coat over her arm, and walked the quiet hallway toward the elevator. As the doors closed around her, she caught her reflection in the steel. No longer the woman in a jumpsuit and mop gloves, no longer a footnote in someone else's story. She was the story now, and the view from the 19th floor wasn't just a window, it was a promise. The apartment on West Belmont Avenue was small, with peeling paint and a cracked window that let in the cold wind at night. The walls were bare except for a faded poster of Lake Geneva taped above the couch. A vacation Pamela Green had never taken. It had been a gift from her sister, back when they still spoke. She stared at it now, sitting on a second-hand love seat with her knees pulled close and a paper cup of instant coffee going lukewarm in her hand. No one called her Manager Green anymore. At her current job, inventory shift lead at a department store in Edgewater, most people didn't call her anything. She'd been there 3 months, long enough to know who refilled the soap dispensers, long enough to know who stole batteries, but not long enough for anyone to care where she came from or what she used to be. She told people she used to work at a hospitality firm. She never mentioned Avalon, never mentioned Ruth, never mentioned that video. But she saw it sometimes, in dreams, in flashes, on the edge of sleep, the way she'd waved Naomi off without listening, the way Ruth had spoken with calm conviction, the way the entire lobby had fallen quiet, not because of anger but because of truth. Pamela had once believed truth was a weapon, something wielded. But now, in the stillness of her one-bedroom apartment, she understood something far more painful. Truth, when ignored, becomes memory. And memory, when laced with shame, becomes a mirror. She tried applying again. Once to a boutique hotel downtown, once to a mid-level consulting firm. Both times she was told the same thing. "We'll keep your application on file." One HR rep, speaking a little too casually, had said, "A quick Google search brings up some context. Maybe wait a year or two for things to cool down." Pamela had nodded politely, then walked into the nearest cafe and cried into her coffee for 10 minutes straight. She had always been proud, controlled, a woman who didn't break. But now? Now she broke all the time. Quietly, in elevators, in grocery store aisles, in her bathroom at 2 a.m., and not because she had been caught, but because, for the first time, she had been seen. Not the version she curated, not the poised posture, not the polished smile, the real Pamela, the one who dismissed people, assumed worth, chose comfort over curiosity. And now that version stared back at her from the mirror each morning. One afternoon in early October, Pamela left work early after a scheduling error. She walked aimlessly down Clark Street, avoiding the rush hour crowd, until she found herself standing in front of the Avalon Hotel. The marble steps looked smaller than she remembered. Through the glass doors, she saw a receptionist speaking warmly with an older guest in Spanish. A young bellhop offered assistance to a couple holding hands. The lobby seemed softer somehow, warmer. And then she saw Ruth. Ruth stood beside a digital kiosk, speaking with a group of international interns. She was smiling, confident, alive. She wasn't in a uniform now. She wore a navy blazer, simple but crisp, with a Cytotech pin on the collar. The interns were listening intently. One of them laughed. Ruth laughed with her. Pamela stepped back from the glass as if it had burned her. She turned, walked quickly across the plaza, and didn't stop until she reached a bench near the Riverwalk. She sat down, trembling. She didn't envy Ruth's title. She envied her peace. That night, back in her apartment, Pamela opened her laptop. The screen glowed against the dark. She typed Cytotech Chicago into the search bar. Ruth's name appeared on the leadership page. She clicked. There it was. Ruth Coleman, Director of Cross-Cultural Relations. The photo was soft, professional. Her bio mentioned her background in linguistics, her time abroad, her vision for accessibility and empathy in workplace culture. Pamela stared at it for a long time. Then, in a moment of something raw and unfiltered, she opened her email and typed, "Dear Ms. Coleman, I know I'm the last person you expect to hear from. I wanted you to know I've seen the footage too many times to count. Not because I think I was treated unfairly, but because I think I was wrong. Deeply, repeatedly. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do want you to know I'm trying to become someone I wouldn't have dismissed in that lobby. You were right to speak, and I was wrong to silence. With humility, Pamela Green." She hovered over the send button for a full minute, then closed the laptop without pressing it. She wasn't ready. Not yet. But someday. And for now, the first step wasn't forgiveness. It was facing the woman in the mirror and deciding to become someone else entirely. The air in Chicago had begun to shift. October brushed gold across the treetops, and the city buzzed with the quiet hush of early fall, coats pulled tighter, coffee brewed hotter, and time itself seeming to slow just a little to make room for reflection. It was a Thursday when Ruth received the message. Naomi Saito. Lunch at the place where it all began? Ruth smiled. She knew exactly where Naomi meant. They met at the same Japanese restaurant just a block from the Avalon Hotel, the one Naomi had tried to visit that first day, before the misunderstanding at the front desk had changed everything. It wasn't flashy. A narrow entrance tucked between a bookstore and a florist. No neon lights, no influencer menus, just the smell of fresh miso, warm wood, and something familiar. When Ruth stepped inside, Naomi was already there, seated at a corner table by the window. There were no bodyguards, no assistants, no visible power. Just two women, once strangers, now something more complicated, something quieter and stronger, equal. Naomi stood and smiled. "You look well." Ruth laughed. "I've been sleeping more, not mopping floors at 2 a.m. anymore." Naomi's eyes softened. "I'm glad." They sat. The waitress brought tea, pouring gently without interruption. The table held nothing but simple bento sets and a small ceramic bottle of soy. It felt almost sacred. For a few minutes they ate in silence, the kind shared by people who no longer need to fill space with words. Then Naomi spoke. "Do you hate her?" she asked. Ruth looked up. "Pamela?" Naomi nodded. Ruth thought for a moment. "No, I did, maybe, for a while, but no." Naomi studied her. "Why not?" Ruth reached for her tea. Her voice was steady. "Because hate needs energy, and I'd rather spend mine building something. I don't need Pamela to be ruined for me to heal." Naomi was quiet. Ruth continued. "In a strange way, I'm grateful. She made me see myself again. I realized how long I'd been quiet, how long I'd been surviving instead of living." Naomi smiled faintly. "You remind me of my mother. She used to say, 'If someone closes a door, build a room instead.'" Ruth laughed softly. "That sounds like your mother." They returned to their food. Light filtered through the window, casting soft shadows across the table. The sound of the city hummed outside, but inside it was still. Then Naomi said something Ruth hadn't expected. "I want to create a new department. one that identifies overlooked talent across industries, former teachers, caregivers, veterans, immigrants, people with potential but no access. I want you to help build it. Ruth blinked. From scratch? Naomi nodded. From the ground up, hiring, training, real equity, no press releases, no marketing gloss, just people finding their way back to their own voices. Ruth set down her chopsticks. That's enormous. Naomi tilted her head. So was being ignored for a decade. You're not just here to fix the system. You're here to reshape it. Ruth looked down, emotion catching her off guard. I spent years wiping handprints off glass I couldn't look through, she whispered. I don't want anyone else to feel that small again. Naomi said nothing. She just reached across the table and placed her hand over Ruth's. You won't be alone. As they left the restaurant, the wind picked up, tugging gently at coats and scarves. Leaves skittered across the sidewalk. Outside, a young woman in her early 20s stood with a delivery bag in hand, nervously checking the restaurant address. Her uniform read, Temp Go. Naomi paused. Are you looking for the side entrance? The girl nodded. It's my first day. I think I'm doing this wrong. Naomi smiled. No such thing. You're doing it. The girl laughed awkwardly. Thanks. Naomi handed her the door code from the restaurant's window. Ruth watched it all unfold with quiet recognition. When the girl disappeared inside, Ruth turned to Naomi. That used to be me. Naomi shook her head. That is you. Still showing up. Still learning. Still changing rooms by simply walking in. They walked in silence for a while, past a bookstore, past a row of little maple trees beginning to blaze red. Then Ruth said softly, Let's build that department. Naomi glanced over, her expression peaceful. I thought you'd say that. And with that, two women once separated by silence and assumptions now walked side by side, equal not in background but in purpose. And across the city, a new door was beginning to open. The ballroom at the Boston Civic Center was quiet, just for a moment. Then came the sound of footsteps, purposeful but unhurried, as Ruth Coleman stepped onto the stage. A single spotlight warmed the space around her, casting a gentle glow over her navy dress, and the small silver pin shaped like a bridge on her collar, Saito Tech's new symbol for unity and global inclusion. She paused behind the podium, adjusted the microphone with calm hands, and looked out into a sea of faces. Corporate leaders, educators, nonprofit founders, interpreters, young scholars, and even janitorial staff from hotels across the Northeast who had been invited as guests of honor. Ruth took a breath and began. When I was 29, I stood in front of a classroom in Kyoto and taught students about linguistics. When I was 39, I cleaned restrooms in Chicago and stopped using my voice altogether. Today, I stand before you as the director of cross-cultural relations for one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the world. Not because I climbed a ladder, but because someone stopped to see me when I had disappeared from the room. Respect, she continued, isn't something you earn once you reach the top. It's something we all deserve the moment we enter the door. Silence hung in the air. Not the kind of silence that demands to be broken, but the kind that asks to be felt. Ruth went on to share the story. Not about Pamela, not about humiliation or revenge, but about awakening. She told of a day in a hotel lobby when a woman was treated like a ghost, and another woman holding a mop refused to let that story end in shame. She didn't name names. She didn't need to. She spoke instead of systems that silence, and the courage it takes to speak again. The real language of respect, she said, is not spoken in syllables. It's spoken in whether we pause, whether we notice, whether we remember that brilliance can wear a name tag. That intelligence doesn't always speak with prestige. Sometimes it just speaks, quietly, waiting to be heard. And then she closed with the words she had carried for years, now reshaped into a promise. Strength isn't power. Strength is the decision to not stay silent when someone is being made small. When she stepped down, the applause rose like a tide. Naomi stood from the front row, smiling, not with pride, but with solidarity. And in the far back of the hall, a woman with streaks of gray in her hair stood silently. Pamela Green. She hadn't registered for the event. She had come quietly, alone, sitting in the back row with a program folded in her lap. Her hands trembled, not from anger this time, but from something softer. She didn't speak, didn't wave, but she listened to every word. And when Ruth left the stage, Pamela turned and slipped out before anyone saw her. Outside, the wind carried the sounds of the city. She looked up at the autumn sky and whispered to no one in particular, "She said exactly what I couldn't." And maybe that was enough. Back inside the Civic Center, Naomi and Ruth sat at a round table with Ruth's growing team. There was laughter, stories, plans. A young woman from Detroit shared that she used to translate for her parents at medical appointments and thought it wasn't a skill, until today. Andre raised a toast. To the invisible ones, no longer invisible. And Ruth, tears quietly resting at the edge of her smile, simply said, to the ones who are just now finding their voice. Months later, on the wall of Ruth's new office in the New York headquarters, hung a framed quote, not a corporate slogan, not a university credential. Just 12 words. Respect begins when we listen to those no one listens to. And beneath it, no signature, because it didn't matter who had said it. What mattered was who chose to live it. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Every healing journey begins with understanding, and by listening, you became a part of it. Thank you for supporting this channel. If you believe in the power of kindness and quiet courage, turn on subtitles and hit subscribe to join us for more meaningful stories.